Well, hello. Better late than never? So sorry about that, y'all. But I feel like this is going to tie really well into the topic I have for today. I am going to talk a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how I use them in my clinical practice, and then kind of move to how they affect our thinking and our everyday actions and change our brain chemistry. And I'm going to do this today, I think, after officially over analyzing this episode for 4 months. I'm going to share some of my personal stories and how they relate to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, I want to say this. I'm not sharing these stories because I want to talk about myself. I am not sharing these stories so people feel sorry for me. I am sharing these stories because, well, for 2 reasons. One, I keep hearing that I need to share them because other people have similar stories and need to hear my story. And then also, I share it because it is the most real example that I have of how this theory applies to everyday life and function. I hope that you can enjoy this episode. I think that it's one, I will probably get emotional. 2, it's going to be a little bit rough because again, it gets political. And I wish that it didn't. I wish that I could not have to talk about it. But again, politics affects the policy for our healthcare. And politics is one of the things to blame for our mental health crisis right now. And I'm going to explain why. So if you don't want to hear it, skip ahead, fast forward, do what you got to do. But it is pretty important to our function at this point in time in this country during this existence. So it's a difficult topic to talk about, but I also find it incredibly fascinating. This is, I will start off by saying none of this information is my own. I've done research. A lot of this is from research, and it's also from the education that I received as part of my profession. I'm not a licensed psychologist. I am a speech-language pathologist. What gives me the right to talk about this? 1, my personal experience, which is why I'm going to use my own examples. My personal experience with going through counseling. And then also, we have to know this because this affects how our clients, our families, our friends, ourselves, our spouses, how everybody is able to take the strategies and education that we have to give as therapists and apply them to their daily life. So that's why I'm talking about this. I created this podcast to start discussing topics that people don't normally get privy to the information or connect the dots to things people don't automatically see outright. So today we're going to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it affects our ability to think and make decisions. And I think I'm going to do 2 different episodes on this topic because you will find out I use a similar adjacent hierarchy when it comes to developing goals and addressing certain skills for my clients who might have neurological disease and also psychiatric disorders and also dementia, which is a neurological disease. So without further ado, I'm going to do my intro now. You are listening to Beyond the Visible, the podcast that challenges the current focus on just what can be seen. Here we dig deeper into the therapies, the strategies, and mindset shifts that create quality of life for people living with Parkinson's disease and other neurological diseases and conditions. I'm your host, Michelle Hill, medical speech-language pathologist advocate, and your guide as we disrupt old narratives and build a stronger, more holistic path forward. Now, let's go beyond the visible together. But first, a little disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by myself and my guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the positions or policies of any organizations they are or have ever been associated with. Also, this podcast is for educational purposes and is not to be considered medical advice. Very good. Now with that, I am going to bring up my notes. Yes, I am. Let's bring up my notes. I have created a script to which I will probably break away from quite frequently because of my stories. So buckle up, get ready. Here we go. I'm going to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in this episode, which I've already said. It's not quite speech-language pathology, but its theory influences my application of therapy interventions. More and more, as my experience develops, I find myself leaning hard on this theory that was developed by Abraham Maslow to determine prognosis and cognitive bandwidth to apply the strategies and education that I give as part of my services. I've also been able to find an adapted cognitive needs hierarchy that has helped me prioritize skills and write attainable goals for my clients. So that's where I think we're going to break this into two different episodes. I'm going to cover Maslow's hierarchy today, and then on the next episode, I'm going to translate the cognitive hierarchy and talk a little bit about that because I believe that that really helps people understand and communicate better with people who have dementia. Okay. So lately, I've even been thinking about how this Maslow's hierarchy of needs plays into our current geopolitical and social environments. How people in power manipulate the masses by jeopardizing people's safety and basic level needs in order to maintain their power. With all the crises being broadcast minute by minute in our mainstream media, it is no wonder that we are in the state of mental health that we are in. This bombardment of breaking news has become absolutely insane. Even with my level of awareness of it all, it's still hard for me to maintain my composure to utilize my talents for the greater good. So, with that said, it has taken me over 4 months to record this episode, and I'm going to talk about why. Not because I feel like people deserve an explanation or that I need to make excuses. This is legit Maslow's hierarchy of needs in real time. Let us rewind. We're going to rewind to about, I think it was the summertime when stuff started to go awry. Real bad awry. Okay, so many of you know I had my own clinic. I had a lot of clients who inconsistently showed up for their therapy sessions. I fought with insurance companies. I did not get reimbursed for all the services that I had provided. Long story short, Michelle and Jamie wound up in a lot of debt because of the business. And so we started out the year, January 2025, with me taking a position. I let the business go because it just became a matter of we can't go into debt any further and we need to make money. I chose to be a contractor for a mobile outpatient company, and although I was spending a lot of time there and driving a lot, again, people were not consistent with their attendance, even though I was going to them. And also, people didn't want to do makeup sessions. And so one thing that a lot of people don't know, especially when you're an independent contractor, you're paid by the session. So when people cancel on me, I don't get paid. So I was unable to have a regular paycheck, one to which that would allow us to pay off the debt that we had incurred with me going into business. And so that became a big problem. We did not have financial security. And in that, both of us became very overwhelmed and stressed out because we were trying very hard to get the debt paid off, and I was working very hard to do that, but I wasn't getting the number of visits that I needed consistently in order to do that. Granted, I made more working as a contractor than I did in my own business, but it still wasn't enough to make enough progress. And so we really mentally were overwhelmed and distraught, feeling financially insecure because every single penny that we made was going to pay off debt, as it should be, but it did not allow for any sort of fun. We'll just say that. So in 2025, Jamie and I went, the last vacation we took was over Christmas in 2024. And so we literally worked from the start of the new year in 2025 all the way until I think it was August. And we finally said, screw it. I need a break. I'm going to go crazy. And in all that time, I have to give backstory. Our girl dog, Roxy, does not get along with small white dogs. There is a reason for that. She's had several bad experiences with these little dogs who think they're going to put her in her place, and she is too much like her mother and says, mm-mm. So when we moved in 2020, the neighbors behind us have 2 small white dogs, and this changed Roxy's personality greatly. And so for the last 5 years, all Roxy has done is go outside and guard our fence and basically try to attack the dogs behind the fence. And we did a lot to make sure she can't get the other dogs. And in the meantime, our behind us neighbor, they got 2 small white dogs. And then over the summer, our next door neighbor, his daughter moved in who had a small white dog. And we had gotten to the point where we were not able to even sit outside and have any peace without all the little dogs barking. And we certainly couldn't keep our dogs outside because at any given point, any one of those dogs would come outside and our dogs would go crazy. We are not the type of people who let our dogs just bark and bark and bark. Although we did a couple of times just to kind of prove a point. We would not let our dogs run the fence and try to fence fight. So it got to the point where not only were we consumed by the weight of the debt I had incurred as a business owner, it got to a point where we weren't even comfortable in our own house. We could not rest. We could not relax. And we were unable to afford to take a nice vacation. We haven't taken the camper out in 3 years because we just didn't know when we could go. And now you have to make camping reservations like so far in advance. And we don't plan our life that far in advance. We just don't know. So when we decided in August, screw it, we're going on vacation, because we're both about to go crazy. The dogs are about to go crazy and we need a reset. We decided to come to Western North Carolina, and we stayed in Asheville at a lovely hotel that allows dogs, and we hiked. And it was amazing. And in that hike, Jamie, who never speaks up for the things that he wants or needs, said, I want to move to the mountains. That was all I needed. I will go anywhere, and I'm no longer tied to a business. So let's do it. We were on this wonderful hike on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it was one of those magical moments that it changes your life. And I looked at him and I said, what do you feel? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, I feel like I'm home. Okay. So our decision to move to the mountains appeared to come out of nowhere, and it kind of did, honestly. But it was really a culmination of a bunch of things happening where we were, and we were just like, we gotta get out of here. It was like our whole entire nervous system was saying, you need a reset, guys. And the only way, and we had been discussing for a long time, how are we going to pay this debt off? How are we going to pay this debt off? And the only answer was to sell our house. And so we looked at this like, okay, here's our opportunity. We need a total start over. We're going to sell our house. We're going to pay off our debt. We're going to find a house in the mountains, and we'll just go from there. Whatever happens, happens. But that was a decision to get out of the weight and the decreased safety and the decreased ability to feel relaxed and safe in our own home. Now, it's dogs barking. It's not like we lived in a bad neighborhood, for heaven's sake. We had great friends, and certainly I had a lot of very loyal clientele, and they're all very upset that I'm gone, and I get text messages every single week of, hey, what speech pathologist do you know that can take an adult patient with X, Y, or Z? And it's like, I was the only one out there that was taking them. So, I left a big hole, and I feel bad, kind of, but I also know that this was something that needed to be done. But in order to make that decision, we had to go to a place where we felt safe and relaxed. So let's talk about a little bit about the creator of the hierarchy, and then I'll get into how my story relates to the hierarchy. Okay, so Maslow was an American psychologist who studied human motivation rather than disorders or pathologies. He developed a theory that provides a framework for what drives people to live up to their full potential, or what he calls self-actualization. So Maslow believed that every single person has an innate desire to achieve self-actualization. And through his studies and observations, he found that people can only be driven to meet their full potential if certain foundational needs are met. He first published his findings in a paper titled Motivation and Personality in 1943. He believed that certain basic needs manifest similarly to instinct and then fuel motivation. So in order to be able to focus on your talents and your creativity and personal growth and development, a person must have their most basic level of physiological needs met and safety needs met before they can even think about meeting those higher level needs of esteem and self-actualization. So I'm going to try to do some editing magic and put a picture that I've downloaded from a website up here. Again, none of this information is mine. This is all gathered by research. I found a really great article about this hierarchy on verywellmind.com. It was very easy to read, and I feel like it does a fantastic job making this information digestible. Anywho, so although the graphic appears like it is a rigid hierarchy, Maslow observed that the order doesn't always follow the standard progression. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. All right, let's talk about the stages. So this is a triangle. And on the very bottom, so I would consider this in a hierarchy like the most foundational need. The most foundational need is physiological needs. So let me rewind a little bit because I skipped ahead. It helps to think about this hierarchy and philosophy in terms of two types of needs. So the needs that come as a result of deprivation, and then needs that form from a desire to grow. So it's like deficiency versus growth. Okay, so the lowest level of needs is physiological needs, which I like to think of as basic human rights. Basic human rights. These are defined by several world organizations. Don't commit me here. Okay, basic human rights include food, water, shelter, clothing, clean water, clean air, your ability to breathe. And he also included in this is sexual reproduction here because we need it for species survival. So how in the world could anyone focus on creating beautiful art or music when they're starving to death or freezing to death? How could anyone focus on their talents to facilitate the needs of others when their own basic level needs are not met? It makes sense. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people. You have to put your own mask on first. If you are starving, if you are too cold, if you are too hot, if you do not have water to drink, you cannot think about how am I going to fulfill my full potential in this world. No, you're thinking about getting your basic needs, right? Right. Okay. So then that's the bottom. Next up, we have safety and security needs. So this includes personal safety, financial security, health and wellness, avoiding injury and illness here, right? So if you think about safety and security, these are also deprivation. If you are being abused, you cannot think about living to your fullest potential. If you are sick, and we know this, I say this all the time. If you're sick, if you're in pain, if you have to go to the bathroom, if you're overly tired, you don't think right. Proven by science, you don't think right when those are lacking. So of course we can't think about painting pictures and we can't think about composing music and stuff like that. The next level, the third level, we have love and belonging, which is acceptance in your family, acceptance in your social circle, in your romantic relationships and community groups. These are all essential to our feelings of well-being. And another one of those crises that we keep hearing about, the loneliness epidemic. Social media was supposed to bring us together, but we have learned that it actually causes more feelings of isolation. We seek connection in the very thing that keeps us disconnected. Now, social media is just a behavior tracking app and also used to create social discord. We'll get into that later. The fourth level on this pyramid is esteem needs. It's the need for appreciation and respect. And when these are met, we have confidence. Without those, we have feelings of inferiority. The facets of this level include feeling a sense of achievement and accomplishment. So I found this interesting, and this I got from that website that I mentioned earlier. I can't remember it right now, and I don't want to lose my spot in my script. So receiving recognition, appreciation, or praise from others, it's building self-esteem and confidence, developing a self-worth and value, and feeling respected in professional, academic, athletic, or social roles. Those are all important, but it's really hard to get there if you're not having your basic level needs met. And finally, we have self-actualization, which includes self-awareness, drive for personal growth, reduced dependence on approval of others and or the opinions of others, as well as the desire to fulfill potential. And so I'm going to quote Maslow here and what he said about self-actualization. This is a direct quote. It may be loosely described as the full use and exploitation of talents, capabilities, potentialities, etc. Such people seem to be fulfilling themselves and to be doing the best that they're capable of doing. They are the people who have developed or are developing to the full stature of which they are capable. So, now that I've talked about this hierarchy and who developed it, what it contains, and its significance, I want to talk about how it relates personally and professionally. So, I shared with with you my personal story about just the last basic year of life. Um, and so I didn't realize this when this was all happening, even though I was still doing research on this and thinking about how I wanted to develop this episode. And finally, one day, it just kind of like smacked me. It was like, duh, just talk about the last year. Um, in the struggles to get this podcast episode recorded. Right. So I brought you up to the point where we decided to move. Then we had to get our house ready to move, which thankfully it didn't take a whole lot, but it did take some. In the middle of all that, we had a leak in our ceiling that we had to figure out where it came from and then fix. And then our furnace went out. Basic level need, heat. We didn't want to replace the whole freaking furnace. We didn't want to spend $10,000 that we didn't have. But there we were, without heat, without a safe heating source to heat our home. And we couldn't sell the house without a furnace. So we had that fun thing to deal with. And then it became keeping the house clean, which, by the way, with 2 shedding dogs is freaking impossible. The amount of time that I spent cleaning every single day was just obscene. It's fine. Also, knowing that we had a house that was way too big for 2 humans and 2 dogs, and just trying to keep that clean was ridiculous on top of everything else. And I had, really wanted to record 2 episodes a week. But I actually got offered a job. That was another reason that we moved. In fact, that was the only reason why we actually moved, was because I was offered a job. I was sought out and offered a job. So I was offered a job and I was able to start to get consistent income. But I had to drive for an hour, which was fine. It allowed me to get started. It allowed me consistent income. It really, really, really helped us financially. It didn't so much help with me being able to be creative, because now I was working the contractor job plus a part-time job plus getting the house ready to move, and packing. And so, as anyone could see, that's kind of a lot. And I was really, I wasn't anxious, but I was just overwhelmed. I was underwater. And when you have all those things to do, and I was trying to work out still, and I wound up having to stop that. Unfortunately, gained all my weight back, but that is what it is. It was just that moment in time. We all go through seasons. And so knowing all of that, and also having to do research, or feeling, at least for me, professionally, I feel like if I'm going to do these podcasts and I'm going to talk about concepts, I really need to have references. I need to do research. I can't just talk off the cuff. First of all, because I don't want to give wrong information. I am not going to be the source of misinformation. Like that is a huge deal for me personally and professionally. So in order to be able to devote enough time for the research, which I don't feel like I did, in order to do that, I need time. And that was just one thing that I just could not make time to do it. And then, once our house sold, then we were all about, well, we had to find a place to live. And we didn't find a house. We wound up finding a wonderful apartment complex and got a short-term lease. So that was great, which means I get to do this all over again in 4 months. What are you going to do? Anyway, so, just what was my brain focused on? My brain was focused on the immediate needs of myself and my family, with the most immediate need being financial security. I had a lot of my, the people that I was seeing as a contractor ask me what had changed. And the biggest thing that changed was the cost of living. Our grocery bill doubled in a week. I was not making enough money to cover a grocery bill before that. And so it wasn't even a self-actualization job switch. It wasn't anything that. It was literally, I need a job to make enough money for us to be able to live. So that decision was made not out of, how can I live to my fullest potential? No, it was made out of where can I go where we can be the most financially secure? And so that was that decision. We are unsafe. I need to find a way to be safe. This is the change I'm going to make. And I've talked about, even on Dr. Wiggins' podcast, about how, I left corporate healthcare because I didn't want to be talked to about my productivity. I'm back in that role again. And it's not because I essentially really wanted to be, because I freaking hate it. I don't hate my role, but I hate the productivity expectation. Anyway, again, I made that decision based on my level of safety and security. We needed financial security. And my husband's job was not enough. Granted, he made good money and he got a lot of hours and he was working his tail off, but one income wasn't enough. I needed 2 stable incomes. I also wanted paid time off. I also wanted a 401k. So all of those things were made out of, how can we be more safe and secure? So now creatively, once we got here, I thought, oh my gosh, Jamie had to finish his time up with his company. So we sold our house and moved into this apartment. And then he worked 4 days a week down in Charlotte, spent the night in a hotel, and he would come back on Thursdays. He did this for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And in my mind, I was like, okay, cool. I can get so much done when he's not here. I can do my podcast. And I did write for the podcast a lot. But here was the thing. We went from a house where the dogs had a backyard to an apartment where every time they have to go outside, I have to leash them up and take them. I went from a routine where I could wake up, let the dogs run free, get my coffee, wake up slow. It was fantastic. I didn't really have a set time to be at work. I went from that to having to wake up and immediately get dressed, take the dogs outside to pee, come back in, make my coffee, drink my coffee, take the dogs back outside, come back in, get dressed, get showered, get dressed, do my hair, do my makeup, feed the dogs, feed myself, make my lunch, take them back out again, and then go to work by a specific time. And granted, it's like, so it took some time to adjust. It took some time to adjust. And mind you, Jamie's not here. He's in Charlotte. So I'm doing this by myself. And now the dogs have to get used to people walking right in front of our windows. They have to get used to a smaller house. They have to get used to all of these things. And I'm the one here trying to unpack, get them used to it, and learn a new job. And so cognitive bandwidth wise, trying to sit down and do research, I was exhausted, y'all. I was exhausted. Mentally and physically exhausted. There was one morning where I had to take those dogs out 7 times between the hour of 5 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. So I feel like time needs to go in that hierarchy somewhere. I'm going to put it under safety and security because I did not have like a secure time. I didn't have a set routine. And it's really hard to think about, well, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to give people? How do I want to word things when you just trying to figure out a new routine? And it seems like it shouldn't be that big of a deal. But it is. It really is. What else? I'm going to take a drink. And again, I'm not saying this as excuses, but this is Maslow's hierarchy of need, like in real time. In real time. And so Jamie's been done in Charlotte. This last week was his first full week home, and it's sandwiched in between 2 snowstorms. It's like, ugh. So sometimes I feel like life and the universe cooperates so that you cannot get the things done that you want to get done, but there's a reason for it. And maybe the reason was that I needed to share these stories with you. One, so you don't beat yourself up. Like, I spent a lot of time beating myself up, but I also spent a lot of time wondering if this was the right episode to do. Okay. So now I'm going to get a little bit deeper. That was just like the last, year of life in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But now I'm going to get really a lot more personal, and also really where I see some of my clients coming from in their level of needs, okay? So I work with a lot of people who have gotten really bad diagnoses. And in that, there is an element of grief. It's grief for the person who's been diagnosed, and it's also grief for the spouse, caregiver, and family of the person who's been diagnosed. And when we talk about grief doesn't have to be just death. Grief can be over any loss. It could be the loss of a pet, the loss of a job, a divorce, the loss of a career. And it can also be about the loss of your health and wellness, right? So that was level, I got to scroll up. When we talk about health, it is the safety and security. Safety and security, okay? So when somebody gets the diagnosis of Parkinson's or cancer or dementia, there is a chemical reaction that happens in the brain that causes people to not be able to live to their full potential. In other words, to take the strategies and education that I provide in the home exercise program that I develop, like for the individual, for that person. I don't have a blanket home exercise program. I develop it for the individual. I take time to do this. They can't do it. Why? Because their second need is not being met. It is under threat. Their safety and security is under threat. For people who are young and diagnosed with these diseases, they are thinking about financial security. I'm going to talk about my experience with my dad. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer, the first thing he wanted to do was set my mother up financially. That was his goal. He didn't really care about his own health. He was like, I know I'm a goner. He knew he had 6 months to live. And so he then just spent his time and his bandwidth on making sure that my mother was set up financially so she would be okay. So Anything else didn't matter. That's where the majority of his brain work went. Now, so for people who've been diagnosed with Parkinson's or with anything, cancer, it doesn't matter, any health diagnosis, people start thinking about, how long am I going to live? That is a big question I get when I see newly diagnosed anybody. How is this going to impact my family? How is this going to impact my income? It's the safety and security that is not being met. And so when I start talking about, okay, well, I need you to speak with intent, that doesn't matter to them. It matters, but it doesn't matter. They're worried about their safety and security. And so I've really had to realize this. And now I have to think about it. And I have to address that in my therapy sessions. Because how can I expect somebody to do a home exercise program for laryngeal and pharyngeal strength when they are concerned about the longevity of their life and their quality of life? So I just kind of feel like none of us as healthcare providers consider this remotely enough. So now I'm going to share my own story about what happened with my dad and what happened to me after. I'm going to talk about what happened in my brain, and I'm going to talk about or give you examples of how that affected my ability to maintain relationships and be myself and be able to live up to my full potential. If it weren't for some very massive counseling, I would not be here today. So for those of you who don't know, my dad was diagnosed in 2016 in March. He had 2 primary types of cancer. Yeah. He had multiple myeloma. We don't know how long, but given what I learned about multiple myeloma, where it pulls the calcium out of your bones and puts them in your kidneys. My dad's first kidney stone was in 1998, 1999. And he had chronic kidney stones ever since. His doctors put him on a low calcium diet. And I can go in about that, why that was so wrong in so many levels. But that's what they did. Oh, you're having kidney stones. We don't know why. So they asked him not to eat leafy green vegetables and no nuts, anything high in calcium, no milk, which was fine because he was lactose intolerant anyway. And basically, he wound up eating meat and potatoes, no vegetables. He developed colitis. So his body was no longer able to tolerate any vegetables, which furthered the meat and potato or pasta. Granted, he wasn't the healthiest fella. I think that if he had quit drinking soda, because we know that colitis is inflammation, if he would have gone on an anti-inflammatory diet, but which unfortunately required him to consume leafy green vegetables and things that had a lot of calcium, it would have made a big difference. Anyway, so I suspect he had multiple myeloma for at least 20 years. And then he developed glioblastoma, which was how we found out that he had multiple myeloma. My dad had a seizure in the airport picking up my mother, who had just been on vacation with me in Charlotte. And so I got a call from my mother, who was screaming, and I could hear my dad in the background struggling to breathe, and she was screaming, "He's having a seizure, Michelle. I don't know what to do." That was traumatic. So I had to pull myself together and figure out what was going on. And we had no idea, but he wound up, there was a medic or a security guard that called 911 for my mother. She had to leave the car at the airport. She had to take him to the hospital. And my aunt flew to Charlotte from Atlanta. And then we both flew to New York. And in that, they did multiple tests. And they came back and told us that he had basically his sternum and his spine were Swiss cheese. The multiple myeloma had taken so much out of his bones. And he had been complaining for years to his doctor about the level of back pain that he had. And the doctors told him he just needed to lose weight. Nobody ever tested for any cancer. Nobody ever tested for multiple myeloma. Nobody ever questioned why the man had so many kidney stones. Why he couldn't eat vegetables. Nobody questioned it. They just told him he needed to lose weight. And he kept saying, I'm trying, but I can't even exercise. My back hurts too much. So if you ever need to know why I don't accept writing off health issues, we're not going to explain it away. I say that all the time. That's why. Okay. So, beginning of late March 26. I then started I would take FMLA because I was working in a skilled nursing facility, and I was just so fortunate to be with so many caring coworkers who donated time off for me. So what happened is I would go, I would work and I would fly to New York for doctor's appointments, and I would come back, and a couple weeks later I would go back, and my dad was going through chemo and radiation, and they gave him 6 months to live. And while he was in the hospital, that first time in March, they tried to do a craniotomy. And they came back within an hour and a half and said, we can't take out the tumor. It's wrapped around his major artery. It will kill him. In hindsight, that might have been a lot less traumatic, but we weren't ready to say goodbye yet, and we didn't think he was ready either. So he went through chemo, he went through radiation, and nothing changed. The tumor size I think it shrank a little bit, but it just didn't change. His personality changed, of course, because of where the tumor was in his left frontal parietal lobe. So he had trouble regulating his emotions. He had trouble with his speech and language. Anyway, I had to watch that. And I know the brain. So it was like I was watching the tumor and the radiation, post-radiation fibrosis, etc. I was watching it all in real time. It was terrifying. And he also didn't want me there, which was terrible. He didn't want me there because he knew I knew. And he said that every time he looked at me, he saw pity, and he didn't want to see it. So he got really mean, and it was terrible. But then, I think it was in July, my mom, I forgot what happened, but her youngest sister, Lori, who worked in the emergency department, she's a nurse, a registered nurse, had gone up to help my mom. My dad wouldn't let anybody help him, but people would go and help my mother. And that was really great because she was still trying to work full time to maintain healthcare coverage for the two of them, basically for him. And so while I was traveling back and forth, I was getting in trouble for productivity at my job, which is one of the reasons why it leaves such a bad taste in my mouth. So the productivity thing, and I just kept getting written up. And my supervisor at the time was incredibly insensitive. And I say that having heard that from my other coworkers about the situation. It was terrible. And so I was going through trauma and feeling insecure in my job. I was also feeling very insecure in my family situation and feeling unsafe. I wasn't sleeping, so my basic needs were not met. And so, of course, I wasn't productive because I couldn't think about anything else other than how am I going to keep my mom and dad safe and healthy, right? Reasonable, right? How can I think about helping other people who really don't want my help at this point anyway? How can I think about what strategies I need to employ? What home exercise program I need to give them when I am concerned about my family's immediate safety? That didn't freaking matter because it was my job and that's what I had to do. So fast forward to July, my aunt was there and she called me and she said, Michelle, it's time to come home. He's not eating and he's not drinking. We all know where this goes. And I said, yes, I'll be there. So I made arrangements and got there and he said his goodbyes. And the next day he he was having a hard time eating. And so I went in because my mom asked me to go in and his face was drooped. And so I was in there and trying to help him eat and swallow his eggs. He was just eating scrambled eggs and he was like, they don't taste good. They don't taste good. They're falling out of his mouth. And I was like, oh shit, here we go. And sure enough, over the course of the next hour, his face went first. He lost use of his arm. He lost use of his trunk. He lost use of his legs. We had called neighbors. Our neighbors had to come and basically help us hoist him from his easy chair to his bed. While we were waiting for the neighbors, I was kneeling underneath his arm to help keep him upright from falling out of the chair. And once we got him in the bed, he started having seizures. That man had seizures every 30 seconds for 8 hours. And I had to watch. Yes, he was on hospice. We called hospice. Hospice was understaffed and they were already assisting with an active death. That man went and had seizures for 8 hours every 30 seconds. I'm not going to lie. That messed me up. It messed me up. There was not a thing I could do about it. He refused to take his medicine from me. Thankfully, some of his high school friends had a daughter-in-law who was a nurse, so she came over and she started helping us until the hospice nurse could get there. Now, normally I'm a huge fan of palliative care and hospice care. I'm a fan in North Carolina, but the people in Steuben County in New York in 2016 in August, they freaking sucked. They were terrible. They didn't want to do anything. So not only am I dealing with that, my dad, having to watch that. Now the hospice nurse is giving me shit because she wants us to continue administering Halidol every 2 minutes. And I said, my mom and I cannot sustain this. We cannot do this here by ourselves. This is an unrealistic expectation, but that was the expectation. So I finally advocated so hard that she agreed, very begrudgingly, to send my dad to the hospital where we could have some assistance. And my dad finally agreed to go because I looked at him and I said, Mom and I can't do this by ourselves, and all of the people that are here right now cannot stay all night long. And so he said, as long as there's no lights, no siren. So we got him to the hospital, and then the hospice team was good then, and the nurses and everything, and he was able to pass within a couple of days. In the meantime, he was pulling out his IVs. Um, he wasn't in his right mind, but he was in his right mind. It was really strange. Of course, I'd never really experienced anything like that before. Um, I've seen people on hospice, but I've not been there in their last days. Usually speech therapy gets kicked out because when you're on hospice, you're not going to get further intervention. And so if that wasn't enough, so my dad passed away in August in 2016. So from March until August, I was going back and forth, trying to work, and be the best speech pathologist I could be in that moment, which probably wasn't very good. I don't even remember. A lot of that time because my brain wasn't working the way it normally does. Yeah, probably all this came from that experience. Anywho, so I was going back and forth, and then in August 2016, he did pass away, and then my focus moved from, now how do I take care of my mother? And so she decided that she no longer wanted to live in Trippsburg. She decided to move into our house in Charlotte, and that was a whole thing. That wasn't easy either. And then she decided that she wanted to move back to Trippsburg. So I had her, and then I had to let her go. Also wasn't easy. In the middle of all that, exactly 6 months to the day, my very first dog, my firstborn fur baby, decided to have a tumor explode while my mom and I were in Mexico. So then I got a phone call from my husband in tears saying, Jackson's really sick and I don't know what to do. And he died that night. So for me, we're talking basically one entire year of trauma, for a whole year, in trauma in multiple different situations. And then my mom decided to move to Oklahoma. That's what broke me. So if it weren't for my husband and my best friend at the time, Melissa, they conspired together, and my husband finally gave me the name of a therapist who specialized in EMDR. Before he did that, I had a conversation with my best friend, Melissa. And she said to me, Michelle, it sounds like you have PTSD. And I remember saying to her, well, that's an insult to soldiers. And she was like, no, it's not. Your trauma might be not war related, but it's still impacting you as if you had gone to war. You need help. You can't get out of this yourself. Boy, was she right. So anyway, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder because of that year. It was terrible. And I think everybody around me knew I wasn't right. I wasn't myself. I would wake up in the morning crying. I would cry the whole time I was getting ready for work. Cry the whole drive to work. I would pull myself together. I would see my clients. I would get back in the car and I would start crying. And I would cry all night. And I'd wake up the next day and I would do it all again. Why? Let's relate it back to the reason why I'm here today. If you think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I didn't know how to exist in a world where my dad didn't. He was the one thing I could count on. He was my go-to person. And probably it should have always been Jamie. But it was always, after my grandpa passed away, it became my dad. So my existence in this world was not secure. My job was not secure. So my financial stability, I couldn't essentially stay sane enough to function at a job. I did my best. And I probably did a good job. But it wasn't safe. It wasn't secure. My mental health was suffering. So, what happens to people who have PTSD, wherever they get it from? People don't have to be in the military to have PTSD. PTSD is a result of either chronic small traumas or one big trauma. In my case, it was both, where it actually changes your brain's response. And this is why this matters so much. I'm telling you this story so that you understand what happens in the brain at this time. So whether it be my story or somebody who was deployed over in Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq, their story, or whether it is survivors of abuse, sexual assault, those types of, those are big traumas. Neglect, all of those things are big traumas. Being diagnosed with 2 diseases is a big trauma. So what happens in your brain when you do not feel safe? What happens in your brain when you don't have your basic needs met? What happens in your brain when you don't feel loved and appreciated while all the rest of that is going on? Your amygdala starts working overtime because your nervous system goes into fight or flight. So this is really, really important. And I've talked about this in my podcast about how to be intentional with your thinking. Okay. When your body activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the chemistry in your brain switches from things like creativity, self-actualization, having fun, that kind of stuff, to a mode of survival where your brain is not attending to anything but threat detection. Threat detection. So that's why with PTSD you have that hypervigilance. People constantly scanning the room, going around unlocking doors. We might see this in some psychiatric patients. We might see this at the VA. We could see this with anybody who is concerned for their personal safety or has had a life event that caused PTSD because of, right? So your body turns into survival mode. It's focused on threat detection. Do I fight my way out? Do I run? So your adrenaline kicks in, your breath becomes shallower and more frequent. So you'll have a higher respiratory rate. And when you live in this way for a long time, it is really devastating to one's health because your brain is not meant to stay in fight or flight mode. Then we have brain chemistry issues because you have too much epinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter. You don't have enough dopamine. Your body can't digest food because it's too busy being ready to go or fight. Your digestive system slows down. In your brain, this is what happens. Your amygdala becomes hyperresponsive. The prefrontal cortex, which is where you regulate your emotions, it stops because of the overreaction of the amygdala. So your amygdala is saying danger, danger, danger. And so you just become unable to regulate emotions. It causes reduced impulse control. So with me, my crying all the time, I was unable to regulate that. I was unable. I would fly off the handle at little itty bitty things. This overreaction of the amygdala causes emotional dysregulation. Also, the hippocampus, when you are in this fight or flight mode with PTSD, your hippocampus begins to shrink. What is your hippocampus responsible for? Short-term memory. If you rewind a little bit, you'll remember that I said, I can't remember hardly anything from that time. Hardly anything, except for like crying all the time and constantly seeing my dad going through those seizures. That replayed in my brain for a year. So my hippocampus shrinks because of the constant stress. And then because that happens and you're unable to regulate your thoughts, you start getting those intrusive memories, which is what happened to me. So your brain under these circumstances does not function to allow us to think about how we can make life better, right? What can I produce, right? We're not thinking about art. We're not thinking about music. We're not thinking about giving gifts to people to help them feel important, although that is a really great strategy to pull you out of it, but we'll go there another time. So, that's how it relates. Okay, I lost friends, I lost family in that time because of my behavior, and I wasn't able to regulate that behavior because I was undergoing a massive psychological event. And so I want you to think about that and how it relates to maybe some patients that you might see, some friends that you might have, some family members that have undergone a stressful, traumatic event, whether it be something like what happened with me or some of the things I mentioned earlier. But we also need to consider being dealt a medical diagnosis that does not usually have a good outcome. We as therapists cannot expect our patients, our clients, to care about our Genius Home Exercise program when all they can focus on are their safety and security, their resources, their health, their prosperity, having adequate food, water, whatever. Please consider those things. And that is why this Maslow's hierarchy of needs is so important. Now, all of that being said, that's how I apply it in my profession. That's how I've applied it personally. Now let's talk about what the F is going on in this country right now. It's important. It is important, and I think I'm going to take my glasses off for this. It's important. All right. So, if we know that when our physiological needs are not being met and our safety needs are not being met, if we know that and our love needs are not being met, when those things are not being met, our brains cannot make rational decisions. We don't think in terms of what can I do to make this situation better. It is about how do I meet our most basic needs. So I want you to consider what is happening in our environment right now. I don't care who you are affected by some of the stuff that is happening right now. I tend to focus on the healthcare part, but it is pretty hard to just focus on that when every single basic need is being threatened by our government. This is political, but you have to think about it, okay? You have to consider this. I saw a post a while back from a person with Parkinson's, an advocate, talking about how the cuts to Parkinson's research tells this population that they don't matter. You're damn right it does. That's the point. That is the point. When we understand how this hierarchy of needs works, and then we understand how to regulate our nervous system. So I think that's the connection I haven't made yet. So let me back up a little bit. When our basic needs are not met, our nervous system dysregulates and moves into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response that we hear so much about. So what has happened? The price of groceries doubled over a week. One freaking week, and the price of groceries doubled. All of those tariffs, however you feel about them, the fact of the matter is that the countries who receive the tariffs don't pay the tariffs, the consumer does. That's why our grocery prices went up. Okay, grocery prices went up. Now, we're no longer able to afford, so security, financial security, the food to survive. So that one act threatened both safety and physiological need. The price of housing has gone up ridiculously. Again, safety, because it affects our resources and also our shelter. It affects our financial security. How do we afford a house? Okay, so we have the issue with just being able to afford food and housing. We're having a big debate about reproduction rights in a man who has no idea what it's like to be a woman, who has no idea about my reproductive system, has no idea about my past medical history. It gets to make that decision for me. That's a problem. That's making a lot of people pretty upset. And what do we know about being upset? It changes our brain chemistry and puts us in a fight or flight mode. We can't make decisions. We have cuts to funding for all sorts of research, from Parkinson's to Alzheimer's to cancer, multiple sclerosis, all of these diseases that we have been working so hard to figure out so that we can help people live longer lives with more quality. All of that work to just be crumpled up and thrown in the garbage and told, well, basically tough shit, doesn't matter. You don't matter. That's an issue of love and belonging. That's an issue of love and belonging. Also, safety. Also, physiological needs. Because now healthcare is going to cost so much that we still can't afford our food. And we've got some people paying a ridiculous amount for prescriptions. They can't afford their food. All right, so you've got those. And now you've got the LGBTQ stuff going on, being targeted. Trans people being targeted. That's an issue of love and belonging and personal safety. Also, brown and black people being targeted. We have armed, masked men stealing people off the streets, whether they're citizens or not, and being sent we don't know where. Even children. Children are being taken and separated from their family, and also not being fed, and also in very deplorable conditions. These aren't theories. These are facts. Whether or not that's a cause you care about It doesn't matter. Somebody else cares about it. And it is causing them to be unable to function because they're so upset. And now we've got these same unidentifiable, masked federal agents killing people on the street and lying about it. I can say that. I've seen the videos. If that doesn't cause concern for personal safety, I question integrity of people who are not concerned about that. That is a huge problem. What else is a huge problem? I'm sure you all can type in, and I'm sure I've left a million things out, but I don't want to belabor the political issues that we're having right now, although they need to be. We need to be talking about them, and we need to be standing up for them. But how can we stand up against them when we're so upset that we can't make rational decisions? And this is where I'm going. That is the point. That is the point. That is the point. Government is keeping us in a state of agitation and fear on purpose because they don't want us to be able to think. They don't want us to be able to create solutions to stop this from happening. That is the point. And I can go on about all the experience I've had with narcissistic manipulators, which has been essentially my whole freaking entire life. I don't really want to get into that right now, but I do have a ridiculous, embarrassingly ridiculous amount of experience dealing with people like this. Now we've got a bunch of people in charge who are doing this, and it is wreaking havoc on our nervous systems. We cannot. And here's the other piece of love and belonging and esteem, right? Under esteem, we had respect, self-esteem, status recognition, strength and freedom, love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, and sense of connection. Our social media is being weaponized to pit one against the other. They're still trying to do Republican versus Democrat, and at this point, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's really just basic safety, and whether or not you are for democracy or against democracy, because, you know, as of yesterday when they arrested the journalist from CNN, Jack Lemmon, I think his name is, you know, they tried to kill free press when they fired Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. That didn't work because we all kind of revolted and stopped subscribing. So they brought Kimmel back. Unfortunately, Colbert's gone. But they arrested a journalist. That's the end of free speech. That's the end of journalism. Free press. That's it. So all of our areas of our basic daily life are under attack. And it is no wonder that we're having such a mental health crisis. So in this moment of time, whether you are a therapist, a healthcare provider, whether you are a person who's been diagnosed with a disease, whether you're a person seeking information about healthcare, we need to consider this hierarchy of needs for every single person that we come in contact with right now. Somebody acting irrational? Are they in fear for their personal safety? We need to think about that. As a therapist, again, what my client isn't partaking in the cognitive exercise program that I set up for them. Are they so consumed with their diagnosis that they can't? A lot of us are out here trying to function and not able to. We can't not talk about it, and we can't not talk about why. For me, I'm worried about everybody. I'm worried about the family members that I have that are gay. I'm worried about the people from my hometown who are low income and on Medicaid. I worry now. I work in a primarily Medicaid facility. I'm worried about my people there. Is this facility going to be able to stay open? I'm worried about my people on Medicare. I'm worried about my family members on Medicare, particularly the family members who are still choosing to get a Medicare Advantage plan. In my response to the post that I saw about Parkinson's and cutting research and feeling like they don't matter, everybody matters. I matter. And I say that having taken 2 years of therapy to be able to come to that conclusion that I matter and I am important. You matter. You matter. And the struggle that you're dealing with right now, that matters too. We're all struggling. We're all trying to make it. And we're trying to do everything that we can to maintain our personal safety and psychological needs, physiological needs, and feeling love and feeling like we belong. When we don't have those, it is impossible to make sound decisions. Now, in the next episode, what I would like to cover is the adjacent hierarchy that I have that talks about cognitive. It's a cognitive hierarchy, and it addresses things like attention and memory and alertness and our ability to, it's metacognition, thinking about thinking. If your basic physiological needs are not being met, you're not going to be able to think about thinking. You're not going to be able to, because your body is surviving. Your brain is in survival mode. So I also want to discuss how we get out of that. How do we regulate our nervous system? How do we regulate our nervous system? Now, this is information that I have come across on my own personal research, not professionally. I don't teach people these strategies really. I do kind of talk about them, but like weighted blankets. Weighted blankets help regulate nervous systems. We know that for our people on the spectrum. It works for those people that are not on the spectrum too. So what are some things? Also, when we talk about our military, our service members, those special operatives, they are taught specific strategies to pull their brain out of fight or flight mode in order to get their job done. It is possible. It takes a lot of work. And I feel like we need to go into that as well. Because when we have people that we're trying to help, and we know that their Maslow's hierarchy of needs are not being met, and therefore cognitively they're not going to be able to think about bettering themselves and such, then we need, as therapists, as healthcare providers, as family members who care about our family or friends, we need to be able to offer some strategies to pull that brain out of that survival mode and regulate it. That's one of the reasons why we chose to move to the mountains. The smell of trees has been proven to regulate nervous systems. The sound of birds in nature are proven to regulate nervous systems. So I would love to talk more about that. And honestly, professionally, that is something that I'm incredibly interested in and may decide to venture into because I am so fascinated by the whole idea of using the rhythms of nature to regulate the brain. So on that note, I hope that you have found this information helpful. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. I'm very sorry that it was so late. Interesting stories as to why, though. If something that you heard on this episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing, sharing, or even leaving a review. It will certainly help other people find us. If you have suggestions for further topics about questions that you might have about the hidden side of healthcare, please feel free to drop it in the comments below. Until next time, I want to say keep going, keep asking questions, go outside and enjoy some nature, keep trying to regulate your nervous system, and keep looking beyond the visible. Thank you.